Good evening, everyone. I'm Cindy Gavin from LetsWin Pancreatic Cancer, and it is an honor to be here with you to kick off our Let's Win, Let's Learn. And tonight we're going to be focused on pancreatic cancer treatments and clinical trials, and we have a great panel ahead. I want to first take a moment to thank our partners from the National Alliance for Hispanic Health for partnering with us on this very, very important topic. And of course, none of it would be possible without our sponsor, AstraZeneca. So I just want to say thank you. We're super grateful for your support of our many efforts. Tonight we have a wonderful program. We have a panel that will be led by Daniel Garza. He will lead a productive conversation with Dr. Kim Reiss and Dr. Jose Trevino. Next slide, please. So for those of you who are new to LetsWin, LetsWin was born in 2016 as an online platform built to connect patients, doctors, and researchers with the latest information on pancreatic cancer. And the goal is to help all newly diagnosed patients get the best treatment options available. All of our stories on LetsWin are published in both English and Spanish, and everything is vetted by a medical expert. I'm excited to share that when we launched in 2016, we launched with 15 stories on the latest promising science, clinical trials, and the patient voice. Today, we have over 650 unique stories from more than 175 pancreatic cancer experts from over 80 institutions. And we've also shared the stories of over 200 patients and over 50 videos of long-term survivors. Next week, we are going to be launching the updated LetsWin site, which is truly an editorial platform. And we are so excited to bring that to you next week. We can't wait to share it. And I think you're going to find the site incredibly user-friendly, intuitive, and it will help patients navigate a difficult journey. At this time, I would like to turn it over to my partner, Marcela Gaitan from the National Alliance for Hispanic Health, who has been an incredible partner in this journey, and she's going to tell you a little bit about her work, and then we will kick off the panel. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Actually, good evening for some people, afternoon for me. Thank you very much for joining us today. Next slide. Okay, right there, never mind. My name is Marcela Gaitan, and I work at the National Alliance for Hispanic Health. We're a nonprofit public health organization, and we work with a network of community members around the country that provide a variety of services to Hispanics. We serve our members, actually, and our partners serve more than 15 million people around the country. And
Take some water, babe.
And then the Alliance works to ensure that the health incorporates the best of science and culture and community in all the work that we do. A lot of our programs are health promotion, health education program, and we address the issues that are important to our community. But the core value of our work is what we do in terms of partnering with the community members. And we're very happy to partner with LetsWin Pancreatic Cancer. I'm also the program director for the Nuestras Voces, our Voices Network program. Next slide, please. And then it's a program that we're addressing the prevention and control of commercial tobacco use, and also prevention and control of cancer. And that's why we think it's very important to address pancreatic cancer in our community, to help educate our community members about the signs and symptoms, but also let them know about treatment options and also the importance of participating in clinical trials. That's an issue that the Alliance advocates a great deal, because we know Hispanic representation in clinical trials is very small. So we want to, with partnerships, for example, with LetsWin Pancreatic Cancer and other partners, we would like to increase the number of Hispanics participating in clinical trials, so they can actually improve their health and well-being, but they can also they can make informed choices with the help with their physicians as well. And now I have the pleasure, next slide. I'd like to introduce my colleague, Daniel Garza, who is going to be our moderator for today. And I want to thank also Dr. Reiss and Dr. Trevino for being our speakers for our program. Daniel, the podium is yours.
Thank you, everybody. How's everybody doing? Welcome. It is November 9th, 2022. I wonder where the year has gone. Everything's been going so quick. Let me get down to my, I want to remind everybody that we want to take a minute to remember those that we've lost recently to the battle with pancreatic cancer. Pancreatic cancer seems to be everywhere. The disease has taken the lives of prominent Americans and Canadians, including John Lewis, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Alice Trebek, and Aretha Franklin. I want to remind everybody that all of your questions will be answered if you just hold on to the very last. If you want to put question on your comment, say question, and then your and then your question. We'll make sure that we get to those at the end of the conversations. We'll have a moment for the Q&A. So just hold on to those questions. In our last webinar on October 26th, we discussed the symptoms of pancreatic cancer and its risk factors. The webinar is currently available on the LetsWin PC YouTube channel. So make sure you go over there, check it out. And while you're there, subscribe to the channel and hit that like button. And also the notification bell. It'll let you know every time there's a new show posted on the LetsWin channel. Today's webinar will be focused on treatment options and clinical trials. Will also be available on the LetsWin PC channel. Plus, everyone registered for today's event will receive the direct link to access the webinar. But first, again, let's review some of the basic facts that we have. The occurrence of pancreatic cancer is increasing. According to the latest statistics, about 62,000 people are diagnosed with pancreatic cancer each year in the US. The overall occurrence rate is 13.3 per 100,000 people, and it is 15.9 for Black Americans. The rate of occurrence is slightly lower in Hispanics, but certain risk factors such as type 2 diabetes are higher in Hispanics. The 5-year survival rate is about 11%. The symptoms are vague and mimic many other more common conditions. The most effective treatment is surgical removal of the tumor, but most patients are too advanced for the surgery. And unfortunately, there is no easy screening test for pancreatic cancer. The pancreas is deep in the body, so tumors are not found on a physical exam, and most people are diagnosed at a later stage of the disease. Many patients say after diagnosis they knew something was wrong, but because the symptoms are too general, it was too hard to get a diagnosis. Your specific treatment options and clinical trials participations are topics that need to be discussed with your physician. But to learn more today, we have with us Dr. Kim Reiss, medical oncologist at the University of Pennsylvania, and Dr. Jose Trevino, surgical oncologist at Virginia Commonwealth University School of Medicine. Dr. Reiss will start by discussing the treatment options for pancreatic cancer, and Dr. Trevino will talk about the importance of clinical trials in pancreatic cancer. After that, we will open the webinar up for questions for both positions. So please stick around and make sure that you ask your questions. First, we're going to welcome Dr. Kim Reiss. How you doing? Thank you for joining us.
Hi, Danielle. Good. Thank you. Happy to be here.
We have so much to cover, so I'm not even going to try and do any jokes right now because there's so much information to give. Usually I'd like to open with some comment, but after looking at our agenda, we have a lot that we want to cover. Let's start off with treatment options. What are the stages of pancreatic cancer, and what are the general treatment strategies for each stage?
Yeah, it's a great question. So pancreas cancer comes in essentially 3 different stages. I know that we often think of cancer staging as 1 through 4, stage 4 disease down to stage 1, but we really think of pancreas cancer as 3 stages. The one of them is resectable pancreas cancer. That means that the patient is diagnosed at the moment that the tumor is identified. The surgeon says, I can take this out. I can take it out right now if that's desired. The second is kind of an in-between stage, which is called either borderline resectable or locally advanced, which basically means that the tumor has not spread to any other organs, but the tumor itself has wrapped itself or is in contact with key blood vessels. And so a surgeon will say, well, I might be able to take it out if it's borderline, but it means either vascular reconstruction, which is difficult at some places and difficult to do, or we might leave tumor behind, which is kind of a no-go. And locally advanced, the surgeon says, I can't take it out right now because too many blood vessels are involved. But again, that's a stage where the cancer is maybe not removable at that moment, but it has not spread to other organs. And then the third one that we kind of use as a stage is anything else, meaning cancer that has spread outside the pancreas at the time of diagnosis, which unfortunately is a lot of our patient population. So cancer that has spread to the liver, the abdominal lining, or the lungs. The treatment strategies are different for those three different scenarios. The resectable scenario, it used to be that surgeons would just up and take these out. And then after surgery, we would talk about doing chemotherapy for a patient, usually 4 to 6 months of chemotherapy if they could do it. More recently, more and more data suggests that even in a resectable cancer, it's better to do some of the treatment up front. And part of that is because it's easier to get the treatment, the chemotherapy, before surgery, just because having a big abdominal surgery is difficult for people and it's hard to get chemo after that. But more and more big centers are opting to start with some chemotherapy. We also believe that even if a tumor looks like it's removable, a lot of times this disease is systemic, meaning it may be hiding in other places, even when we meet the patient and they have resectable cancer. For the other side, the metastatic patients, those that have tumors that have spread to other organs, that treatment strategy is usually based in chemotherapy, although there's lots of nuances to that and targeted therapies that are being developed. But right now, the mainstay of treatment is chemo. And then the middle group, the locally advanced or borderline resectable patients, often get some portion, some amount of chemotherapy and sometimes radiation therapy, really to try to render them resectable, shrink the primary tumor to get them there. Sometimes successful, sometimes not. But that's probably the most controversial stage, I would say, where we all sort of don't know exactly what to do, and different institutions and different physicians do just slightly different approaches.
First off, I want to say I'm glad that you mentioned the stage where we don't know what to do, because a lot of times, as a patient, we don't know what decision to make. It's kind of comforting for me to hear that you say that sometimes even the doctors are like, we don't know how to approach this. And it's not part of the questions that we have. But I just thought that it was really interesting that you said that. Like, it just shows to prove that it takes both the patient and the doctor to have a conversation, correct?
It's absolutely a partnership. It's about talking about, these are the choices, these are the possible ways we could do this, what works for me and what works for you. And I also think it's hard for patients, especially those who have resectable, borderline resectable, and locally advanced disease, meaning those that don't have metastatic disease. They'll go see different doctors and go to different centers, and they'll often get different opinions. And what I say to people when they come back to me is, listen, if you saw 4 different experts, and every single expert, and these are experts in this field, are giving you a different answer, that means we don't yet have enough data to know exactly what to do. And so that means that's frustrating, but it also means we have some choice as to how to proceed based on, your wishes and kind of how it works for the both of us.
Now, there's a word you mentioned a couple of times that I have never heard of until now. Resectable?
Yeah.
Could you define that for us?
Sure. Resectable cancer, and sorry, please correct me if I use my own language here. Resectable means removable. So when a pancreas tumor is not involving arterial vessels, and Dr. Trevino is going to talk about this more because he's a surgeon and I'm not. But if a pancreas tumor is not involving blood vessels and is just sitting in the pancreas, it is relatively, and again, not a surgeon, but relatively straightforward to remove that tumor. There are 2 different types of pancreas cancer surgery, actually 3 really, but the 2 big ones are something called a Whipple which means that's a tumor that's in the head of the pancreas, which sits right against the gut. And so part of the duodenum, which is the gut, and the head of the pancreas are removed, and then pieces are hooked back up. That's a difficult surgery for people to go through. It's, it's a big intestinal surgery. And on the other side, if the tumor is on the tail of the pancreas, which is over towards the left side of the body, that is a much simpler surgery. The end of the pancreas gets taken out and the spleen gets taken out. It's called a distal pancreatectomy. That's the other way that we can remove these tumors typically. The third type is a total pancreatectomy, which is rare, not as commonly used.
Gotcha. Because so far what I'm understanding from what we're talking about is where, for instance, I'm an cancer survivor and we had the 4 stages.
Mm-hmm.
When we come in here, it's 3 stages that we really are talking about, correct?
Yeah.
It's the
It's
removable,
three clinical stages, kind of.
right?
Yeah.
And it's I'm gonna dummy it down for me so that I can understand it. It's the removable one, it's the and then it's the one that we're going to see what the options are, correct?
Yeah, it's the removable one. It's the one that's spread, and then in between is the one that's local but is not removable right now.
Gotcha. Radiation. I remember when I was going through cancer, radiation was kind of like the last option that we wanted to get to if we didn't have to. As radiation is a treatment option, when would we consider it? Yeah, at what point as a patient should I say, okay, let's do radiation?
Yeah, so radiation has a role, I think. It's important to know, and I hesitate to even mention this, but it's important to know that radiation for the treatment of pancreas cancer on its own has not ever really shown in pancreatic cancer, this is not true for other cancers, to improve the survival of patients, right? It doesn't actually make people live longer, typically. However, it does have a role. One is actually in that stage of the non-removable, but also not spread out tumor. The one thing that radiation really does do is prevent local progression, right? You're aiming the beam right at that tumor. You're not treating anything outside with radiation. You're just aiming at one spot. And so when you treat somebody with radiation to their primary tumor, we know that you're going to delay in a lot of cases or prevent that tumor from growing and causing local destruction, pain, bowel obstructions, other problems. So it has a role there to prevent local progression and symptoms for patients. So we use it there a lot. When somebody has had a surgery to remove their tumor, it's been studied to do radiation in that setting. It's not shown in an all-comer scenario to improve survival. However, if a patient has a surgery and they have a lot of lymph nodes that are positive, a lot of lymph nodes had cancer in them when they look at it, or there was what's called a positive margin, which means at the edge of the tumor, at the edge of the removed tumor, there were cancer cells, which implies that there were cancer cells still left behind on the other side. That is a scenario where it is very tempting, and many people do radiate the field, meaning the area where the tumor was removed, to try to prevent it from coming back in that area. So those are 2 of the main reasons we use radiation. The third is very simply for comfort and for pain control. So if somebody has an area that is hurting them, a metastasis, meaning a spread tumor to, say, a bone that is bothering them, something of that nature, radiation can be very effectively used to control pain and to make people feel better in those types of scenarios. But the mainstays of treatment really still rest on chemotherapy and surgery, I would say.
Sure. You've actually given me the information of some of the questions that I had ahead of, but
I'm
thank
sorry.
you. No, it's great because you're just flowing so good with the information. I hope everybody out there is understanding. If you're not, remember at the end, you can ask some questions and we'll come back.
Ask me
We'll come back
questions.
to the Q&A. We talked about it a little bit. I talked about it in the intro when it comes to the stages, and some people don't identify the cancers until latter stages.
Mm-hmm.
What is the standard therapy or treatment with people with that level of advanced cancer?
If the cancer has spread to other organs?
Correct.
Yeah, so the mainstay still is at this point chemotherapy to start with. There are really 2 combinations of chemotherapy that we use the most frequently when we first meet somebody with this cancer that has, if it's spread to other organs. One, and these may be familiar to some people on the who are listening. One is called FOLFIRINOX, which is given every 2 weeks, and the other is called gemcitabine and nab-paclitaxel. So they're kind of two different combinations. Which one you choose, again, just like before, it's a discussion with the patient. What do you prefer? What are the side effects you're most afraid of? And then also, what's your general health? What are you, there are things that would preclude us from using one regimen or the other, depending on the patient's health. That said, though, one of the ways that I really encourage people to sort of open the door, hopefully, to other treatments other than just chemotherapy is to get 2 types of testing, and really every single patient who is diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, it doesn't really matter the stage, should get what's called germline genetic testing. This is in the national guidelines. Everybody should be offered this. They don't have to do it, but they should be offered it if it's possible to get it done. And that is to look for, that specifically looks for inherited conditions that might increase the risk for pancreas cancer. And some people who have those conditions will have additional treatment options available to them no matter their stage because of an inherited issue. The other type of testing that we recommend for anybody with at least those with non-removed cancer, so not the resectable folks, but everybody else, is to get what's called somatic testing, which is testing of the tumor itself. So that's not looking at you to see if you've inherited something, but specifically to look at the tumor and see what changes happened in those tumor cells or in your pancreas cells that turn them into a cancer. And if potentially any of those variants or mutations or changes might be targeted by a specific type of treatment, whether it's on a clinical trial or whether there's one standardly available. So that's something that most oncologists are aware of. Again, everybody should get the inherited test, the germline test. There are a number of commercial platforms that do that. And then the other type, somatic testing, tissue testing of the tumor itself, should be offered if it's possible to every patient with what we would consider incurable disease. And I should be honest and say that most people don't have a usable variant at this time in either bucket. Many do, up to maybe 15% of people will have, or 20% maybe will have something that we can use and take advantage of and offer, extra treatment. But there is a large percentage that leaves, 80 to 85% of patients without something. But there is a lot of research happening looking at these variants. And at some point in the future, many of them will be targetable, especially those in KRAS. And that's a very exciting research story that we won't spend too much time on today. But it's eventually this is going to be much more usable. And right now, you still need to get it done, because even if it's rare, if you don't test, you'll never know, right? And then you've denied somebody that option.
So before we give you a little rest, seems like germline testing is like the best option we have out there right now for people to maximize the options for patients. Is that correct?
Well, both. So it's a combination of germline testing, which looks for inherited variants, and then the tissue testing, which is called somatic testing. And basically what you're trying to do is add, this is what I tell my patients, you're trying to add to the menu of options by doing those things.
Cool. That's pretty good. Thank you for that information. Those are 2 things that I wasn't aware of. So I just learned something new. We're going to give you a little break, and we're going to bring Dr. Trevino on and continue some of the conversation with him. Dr. Trevino, how are you doing, sir? ¿Cómo estás?
Good. Muy bien. Can you guys hear me okay?
We can hear you well. How about you on the back? If there's an issue, just message me there. Dr. Trevino, we want to thank you to join this important conversation. Can we just start with some of the basic stuff? Just some basic information. What is a clinical trial for people who don't know that?
Yeah, I think Dr. Reiss just gave a really good overview of pancreatic cancer and how we manage it. There's a big question about unknowns, and so absolutely. I mean, I think there's so many wonderful things that you, Daniel, and Kim mentioned in the talk earlier, in this session, about really being a team effort between the patient and and the doctor in regards to what's the best management for a disease that in some cases can be very difficult for the patient and the family and everybody that is involved, including the physician. And so a clinical trial is an interesting kind of concept that I think it's for a long time has been kind of looked at in the wrong way. And what I tell my patients is this, is that no matter what, you're coming in to get the best care you're going to get. You're going to get what we call, quote unquote, the standard of care. And while that sounds pretty generic, I mean, it just means that we're giving you the best we got. When you think about a clinical trial, it's pretty much just saying, we're going to give you the best we got, plus we're going to give you something else that's going to be a little bit experimental that we know can work, might work, and we're going to give it a shot with you. And I will tell you that when you think of it in that perspective, people understand that you're not being experimented on per se. You're being treated with the best, but you're being treated with an extra drug that might help you live longer. And along the same fact that it helps you, might help hundreds, if not thousands of people with the disease. In this country and the therapeutics we have are based on clinical trials. Everything we know about therapies on not only cancer and other aspects of medicine have been based around the idea that we try something new. And for me, that's what is so amazing about it. And so in a brief kind of session, that's what a clinical trial is.
Thank you for saying that. Yeah, because for most folks out there, for most of us, I'm 22 years HIV positive. Every medication that I've taken went through a trial. Somebody took the time to go and do the sessions and take the medications. And now, once you're in a trial, most people really don't know what to expect. And I think a lot of people fall out of trials because they have one idea of what's going to happen and something else. Could you tell us, is there a general basic foundation for trials?
Yeah, and so it depends on the you know, I won't go into too much depth, but it depends on the type of trial, right? And so we start sometimes early just testing the drug for toxicity to make sure that the drug isn't going to hurt somebody. And that's typically in patients that might not have the disease. And just to kind of see whether or not the drug in and of itself would affect a otherwise healthy individual. If we can pass all those and get to the point of treating somebody as we get into the further down the clinical trials, then we start making comparisons of that particular tested drug. So that new drug that we're thinking that might be able to change the way we manage the disease. And we do a comparison between the standard of care, which is what we typically give, plus the therapy, when compare that to patients that just get the standard of care. Now, sometimes that's what's called randomized and blinded. And those are just two fancy words that says that you just happen to get the luck of getting the standard of care, which is the great that we have, or you get the standard of care plus the therapy that might be able to change everybody. And we do that because we want to compare, right? We want to know that that particular addition, that new drug, is going to change the kind of overall perspective or the overall outcome. And so these trials are very, you know, a lot of really smart people get behind these to really think about what's the best way we can test this. And that is the best way that we do. So in brief, it's, you know, we test the toxicity of a drug at the beginning, and then toward the end, at the later side of these clinical trials, as we start advancing, we really test these drugs with the standard of care and compare it to the standard of care to see whether or not that drug is going to make an impact or not. And so in brief, that's kind of what we believe in that.
Gotcha. And when you were talking about standards of care, and that resonated with me so much. I remember when my mom, she passed away a couple of years ago, but she had Alzheimer's, and when she was first diagnosed, there were some trials available. But the ever-going conversations of trials, particularly in the Latino community, hombre, ¿pa' qué vas? Why go? Te van a dar la pastilla que no hace nada. They're going to give you the pill that doesn't do anything. You're going to waste your time. So how do patients know? And is that still true today, that you will just get a placebo pill and nothing's going to happen, and then you're going to get sicker? You know, I'm playing devil's advocate right now, porque así la gente. But what would we say to people who think that they're not really part of a trial?
Yeah, and so, you know, to be a part of a trial is an exciting adventure. I think that at the end of the day, you really do ultimately come out with the impact that you made a difference. And but remember, right? And so let's not forget that they're not really getting that pill that does nothing. They're getting the standard of care. You're being treated no matter what, except the question will be whether or not you get that pill that make the difference at the end of the day or not. It still makes you part of an incredible aspect, right? An incredible component to how we look at medicine and how we advance this field. I mean, you mentioned it earlier today that the 5-year survival rate is 11%, which is really, really low for pancreatic, for cancer patients. And as you kind of alluded to, it's a bad disease. And so there is so much we can learn, whether it is you get the standard of care or the standard of care plus a certain therapeutic. And I say that, and I want to emphasize that and really kind of push this forward, because at the end of the day, there's still so much we don't know. There was a little bit of talk earlier by Dr. Binder, who really talked about the two kind of main standard of cares, which is, FOLFIRINOX or Gemabraxane or Gem-Nab-Paclitaxel. And so those two drugs, interestingly enough, while there might be some randomization, some random application of a certain drug versus another, we are starting to recognize that some people respond really well to FOLFIRINOX and some people respond really well to Gemabraxane. And it's really, at this point, this is like where the science really hits. I mean, this is where it gets exciting, because some people that don't respond well to FOLFIRINOX will respond really well to Gemabraxane and vice versa. And so, who would think, right, that we could just give the standard of care, and some people do really well with the standard of care, whether it's on a clinical trial or not, and then the other. And so it's important for us to see that even though you might not be getting that particular drug that might be the experimental, quote unquote, experimental drug, we still want to see how you do. And there's statistics to show, as you kind of alluded to, that Black Americans in this country do worse with pancreatic cancer than anybody else. But no one has ever really, until recently, started looking at Latinos and Latinx patient or Latin or Latinas, however you want to look at this. There is a huge difference between the outcomes in Latinos versus Blacks and whites. And that's an interesting fact. And so our participation in this as Latinos, and as we kind of maneuver through this, is so incredibly important, because there's so much to know.
It's a really key point that you just mentioned. And yes, we don't mention a lot in the beginning, but Latinos don't generally go through studies or surveys or help in any part of the trials. And then we wonder sometimes what we're left out of the research and the documentation that comes out. It's like, because if we're not present, we won't be counted, basically, which leads me to the next question. Let's say, for instance, mi tia, Maria, I finally convinced her to go and fill out the paperwork for the trial. She's like, sí voy a ir, mijo. And I'm like, just to be safe, I'm going to drive you. And I get her there and we fill out the paperwork and we figure out, because not everybody, like you said, not everybody is qualified to fit a trial. But let's say we passed everything. The doctors are like, see, we're going to take you. Now she thinks that it's just about showing up. But what are the responsibilities of people, patients, clients, when it comes to trials?
Yeah, and so I mean, I think there's a big responsibility on the physician, right? And so I tell you that one of the most important components about clinical trial participation is on the physician. So yes, a patient has to consent. In other words, they have to say, yeah, I want to be part of this. I want to make a difference. Let's see what we can do. It's also on the physician as well to be able to communicate their clinical trial and what it's going to do and what the purpose of it. So for a long time, right, historically in this country, people have thought to themselves that, being part of a clinical trial is experimentation. And yes, this country does have a history of doing that. And it's a bad history, right? And it's a history that physicians, we want to forget. But understanding the fact that at the end of the day, that history is behind us, and we are now we're a different culture. We are now thinking about diversification and understanding people's race and ethnicity and how important that all is. And so when we bring people to a clinical trial, it's not only the patient to say yes, but it's on the physician to be able to explain and spend the time to have them understand what it is all about. I have the privilege of treating patients with pancreatic cancer on a daily basis. And let me tell you, it's the most important thing is being able to sit down and explain to them why we're doing this and how important it is for them to participate. One of the things I didn't mention earlier, and I think that this is incredibly important, why Latinas are involved in clinical trials, is because guess what, Daniel? At the end of the day, Latinos do better with pancreatic cancer than any other race, ethnicity. In other words, they do better than whites and they do better than blacks in this country. Yeah. And nobody knows why. And regardless of whether you're treated in a community center, whether it's an academic center, in the top-notch areas or what have you, we have this ability to have this, and this is where the genetics, you guys talked about this earlier, about somatic and germline mutations, that Latinos do better and nobody knows why. And it's almost like I tell them this, I tell my patients this, man, you could hold the secret to what's gonna allow us to understand this disease better and subsequently be able to treat not only Latinos and Latinas, but everybody, right? These secrets that everybody holds. And one of the biggest things I always tell people is, they say, why do I want to be part of the clinical trial? I said, because God made you special. And there's always something about you that could help everybody with this disease and then some. And so I'm such a big proponent of that. And so that's it, that's what we're passionate about.
I think the only thing I can add to that is, órale mi gente, apúntense, let's go do those trials and surveys and testing and go, vamos, yo voy por ustedes. Now, one question that I usually ask right up front when I've submitted for a trial, how long is this going to take? And can I opt out at any time?
Yeah, and those are great questions. And so there's variable components of a clinical trial. And in some cases, unfortunately, the clinical trial might end a little early because let's just say it doesn't work, right? You get progression of the disease and they say the definition of insanity is to continue doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. If the medication ain't working and the trial isn't working, yeah, sometimes you just gotta pull the patient out and think of something else. And so, in terms of your second kind of question is, can you pull out? Absolutely. I mean, that's just it. For me, I tell my patients this: listen, at the end of the day, it's about the quantity of quality life. It's not about quantity of life, it's the quantity of quality life. And I do big surgeries, right? And I tell my patients that if in 2 weeks after my surgery, you're not back home having a dinner with your family and really appreciating your life, then we have to reconsider what we're doing. And that goes not only with surgery, but therapies as well. I mean, sometimes it's hard for us to believe that we're all gonna die one day, right? I mean, even when as teenagers, we don't believe we're ever gonna die. But as we get older, we recognize that we're not going to live forever. But it's a matter of appreciating the quality of the life that we have with the loved ones that we have that is so important, that drives us to really work that partnership with our patients to say, I'm going to do my best to keep you on this earth, but it's going to be a good time that you'll be able to spend with your family and the people that you love, to appreciate what you have. Because if it gets so bad that our treatment is hurting you more than the cancer, then we have to ask ourselves, what the hell are we doing, right? So I'm always about quality and ability to people understand that when they're in a clinical trial, it doesn't mean you have to stay. It only means that we're here to try to give you a longer lasting life that is filled with joy. And if you want to pull out of that, hey, you know what? I'm all with that. And I've always supported my patients with that.
One last time for the people in the back that didn't hear us, can you tell us who should participate in clinical trials?
Everybody. I mean, everybody. People always talk to me and they always ask me this one question, right? Everybody comes to my clinic and says, hey, doc, how much time I got left? I mean, I get that almost like on a daily basis. Doc, how much time I got left? Because I got pancreatic cancer and I've been Googling this and this is how much time I got left. And I always tell them the same answer every single time. It's not up to me, right? It's not up to even you. It's up to God, right? God determines your time of death the moment you took your first breath. And I truly, strongly believe that. And so when people come to me and they really want to know about all the things that are happening to them, I tell them you have to just continue to have hope, move forward, think about the fact that we're going to beat this disease no matter how it comes. And so participation by everyone helps us understand, because every one of us, as I said earlier, has something unique to give. I mean, that's why God put us here. God put us here for a purpose, and everybody has their purpose. And if you're part of something big like this is what makes it incredibly amazing, right? Our human bodies are amazing to tell us so much. And I think ignoring it is the wrong thing to do. I think the more we participate, the better we understand. At the end of the day, we'll beat this disease and we'll live a much longer life.
Excellent. Thank you, Doctor. Before we bring Dr. Reiss back in, I want to remind y'all, like, if you're interested in finding clinical trials, here's some pointers. Talk to your doctor. Always talk to your doctor. They're sure to find out. Your local agencies, service agencies, support groups. Somebody should know about trials happening, so make sure you ask for them. If you'd like, you can visit clinicaltrials.gov. All one word, clinicaltrials.gov, not .com, .gov. Go over to LetsWin Emerging Med Clinical Trials Finder. You can find something near you, or PanCan's Clinical Trial Finder. So that's either LetsWin's Emerging Med Clinical Trial Finders or PanCan's Clinical Trial Finders. That's a little tongue twister going on right there. I want to remind everybody who's watching us, if you're watching us live right now, what's your questions? I'm sure you have some questions. I'm sure something needs to be cleared up for you. So make sure you post your questions on the chat, and we'll pull out some from there. I know we have a comment there. Oh, if you have any questions. Welcome back, Dr. Reiss. How are you doing?
Thanks. Good.
So we should have both doctors on screen at this moment. I guess we have about 15 minutes, and while some of the questions from the audience comes out, I still have some things that we can throw out there. And sometimes people think it's going to cost me. Like, no, I don't want to join a trial because it's going to cost me money. They're going to want something. If it's an organization, I have to make a donation or something. No, mejor no voy. I'm not going to go. How much does a clinical trial averagely cost?
That is a really, really, really good question. It's one that we get in clinic a lot. Is this going to cost me? And of course, it wouldn't be in no way ethical or fair if it cost more to go on a clinical trial than to get standard of care, because that would greatly increase discrepancies between who could join and who can't. So the general principle is that insurance, whatever your health insurance already is, when you join a clinical trial, your insurance will typically pay for anything that is standard of care. So if you see a doctor every 2 weeks, you get a CT scan, you get routine blood work, your insurance will continue to pay for that, and you will get whatever copay you've been getting previously. Anything experimental, and that includes the clinical trial drug, the medicine, if it's an infusion, if it's a pill, doesn't matter. Any experimental procedure, and anything that is not used for your clinical benefit. So for example, if the trial requires a biopsy that is only used for research purposes, or we draw extra blood that is only sent to a research lab, all of that cost is absorbed directly by the trial. So what I tell people is that it should not be any different from an out-of-pocket standpoint than standard care. And it's really important, and I know you talked about this, but just to emphasize again, signing up for a clinical trial is not a binding contract. You are not signing any kind of thing you can't get out of. I tell the patients in clinic, if you sign the document and on your way out the door or in the car, you decide, you know what, this really isn't for me, I want to do something else, no problem. It is a completely voluntary commitment, and it is completely okay. And your doctor's not going to be upset with you if you change your mind and you want to pursue a different avenue. So know that these are partnerships and are volunteer, and that's how it should be.
Cool. So you will not be hearing from the trials and surveys and studies police knocking at your doors like, you had an appointment 5 minutes ago. Vámonos, let's go. If I sign up, say for instance, I sign up for a trial, do I get to still go to my own doctor, or does the trial supply their own specialist?
So I don't know how Jose does it. I say you can do whatever you like. You certainly need to see the doctor who is treating you on the clinical trial. That is, there are required visits. There's a schedule that comes with trials. You need to be seen every week or every 2 weeks or every month or whatever it is. And that needs to be with somebody who is running the trial. And the reason for that is that when you run a trial, you're using an experimental agent. And sometimes the toxicity is not entirely understood, or we're monitoring that very closely. So essentially, a researcher or research organization makes an agreement with the FDA to let us use a non-approved drug to try to help people, try to change the standard of care. So the toxicities and the efficacy of these things have to be, meaning how well they work, has to be very carefully tracked, right? So the person who is providing the clinical trial drug and who's running the trial at that institution needs to be following that patient. That said, people have extremely close relationships with their oncologists. When you are very sick, the person who is taking care of you is very important to you. And so I personally have no problem if people are seeing me, as long as you're staying on the schedule of the study, if as often as they need to or want to see their own oncologist or own physician is completely fine, because that's an important emotional support and it's an important relationship.
Yeah, and I just, I think Dr. Binder is dead on that. And I think the other thing we have to understand is this, that we for the longest time, especially major academic institutions that were running these clinical trials and kind of pushing these forward, kind of lost our way in a sense. And so there's the idea that these academic institutions stand on an ivory tower that have siloed a lot of medicine. And I think that what we should do as academic centers, especially reaching out, especially because we're so formidable on so many levels, is to reach out to our community medical oncologists and work with them. And so participation from our community and brings in more patients to clinical trials, allows those patients to funnel in and work together. And so, as was mentioned by Dr. Binder, is that we work in that direction where you can have a clinical trial in a major institution, but working with a community center community oncologist along the same routes of that trial is incredibly important for the collaborative efforts that we need to bring in certain patient populations.
So what I'm hearing is that if I join this trial, so for instance, you both are running a trial, and I have my Dr. Smith that I see every month, anything that happens in the trial can be connected to my doctor so that we're all on the same page. Because sometimes that's the fear within patients, like doctors aren't talking to each other and things are happening, but we can make sure that there's a communication, correct?
No, absolutely. I think these things need to be partnerships, and one of the, I'm in the Philadelphia area, and there are a lot of surrounding big institutions and also a lot of surrounding community practices. And one of the major efforts for us, but also at Penn, but also for Temple, Fox Chase, which is Temple, and Jefferson, is to make sure that we are involving our community oncologists in our decision making for patients when we see them, and also in our to let them know what trials are available and kind of how to get our patients involved. The other major way that we're trying to get community oncologists involved is actually through the cooperative group system, which is run by the NCI, the National Cancer Institute. And the cooperative groups are big research organizations run by NCI that involve both academic and community sites in the same bucket. So if you open a trial through that system, it can open in academic centers, but it can also easily open in community centers who if they want to run the trial, they have the ability to open it if they are a member of the cooperative group. And, as I think you've alluded to, one of the major, a lot of the disparities, there are a lot of disparities, right, for people who aren't joining trials, and maybe it's because they don't want to, but probably it's because they don't have access, or they're not told about it, or they don't know how to get it. And trying to open in community sites and really engaging our community colleagues is kind of the only way to get it done effectively, and to get it done in a way, as Jose mentioned, Dr. Trevino mentioned, to make sure we get representation in our studies from all different types of people and different types of ethnic groups and demographics. Because ultimately, if you only test your drug on one type of patient, it is pretty difficult to argue that it is going to be effective across the board, right? So it is really important that we work hard to try to make our trials accessible for people, no matter where they are or what race or ethnicity they are, so that they get that choice.
All right. We're almost down to the last couple of minutes, and there were some people that asked some questions on the chat, but I think we answered most of them in our conversation. If we did not, please let us know, and we'll try to get them to Dr. Reiss and Dr. Trevino to make sure that they answer it for us. Any last thoughts before we go? Dr. Reiss?
It's a difficult disease. Pancreas cancer is a difficult disease. Like Dr. Trevino mentioned, people ask, how long do I have? It's, of course, that's the question when you're faced with your mortality in this way. The progress has been slow for a long time, but it is finally picking up. I really do believe that. The targeted therapies now are applicable to approximately 10 to 15, maybe % of patients that we see. And the goal and the hope over the coming years is that we keep chipping away at that pie so that ultimately most people are able to have some sort of option for a targeted treatment to improve their outcomes.
Dr. Trevino, any last thoughts?
I really appreciate, everything that's happening here, and LetsWin is an amazing organization, and with the National Alliance for Hispanic Health, I think this has been phenomenal. I hope that at the end of this talk, that people resonate the fact that the importance of who you are in clinical trials is what's going to make the difference for everyone. An 8 to 10% participation from Latinos and Blacks is so bad. I mean, it hurts, because I know that the Blacks are affected more and have a worse outcome than anybody else. And Latinos have maybe an advantage that we should really consider. And so, it's these foundations and the NIH and the NCI that are, to some degree, funding a lot of this. Some of these clinical trials, and other groups that are funding these clinical trials are starting to pick up the fact that there should be a point where, without actual participation from certain racial ethnic groups, that the outcomes aren't really going to tell us a lot. And so I hope that in the future, there will come a point where there is a mandatory ability for all these groups that are doing these trials to have a great community outreach program to allow for the growth of people to understand. And a lot of the responsibility falls on us as physicians, surgeons, as medical oncologists, as radiation oncologists, to really be able to resonate with our community and resonate with our patients regarding this. And so my hope is one day that we can really come together and really make a huge impact on this disease process. And so I really appreciate your guys' time. And I hope that everybody learned a little bit of something today. Thank you.
And before you go, we actually have a caller. We have somebody who wants to ask a question. If you don't mind just sticking around for a couple more seconds. I wasn't able to see the people asking questions, but we have Betty Dicker who wants to ask a question. Betty, you're on the air.
Hi, I'm in the Apollo. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm in the Apollo clinical trial, which I think Dr. Bender is yours.
It is, yeah.
Up here at NYU.
Yay!
And I'm almost finished with my year or 12 cycles.
Wonderful.
I'm BRCA too, so I have had a very good response to everything. So I'm thrilled and so thankful. Just curious about do you ever find out if you had gotten the medication or not, or I know my cycle might finish in a month, but I was just curious if at that point things can be unblinded, or is it really when only the whole clinical trial finishes that sometimes they allow you to find out?
Yeah, it's a really good question. First of all, thank you for joining that study. That is wonderful. And thanks to my NYU colleagues who are really towing the line there and helping us enroll that. So it's a really great question, and it really depends on the study that you're enrolled in. For the Apollo study specifically, there are specific guidelines about when somebody can be kind of unblinded or not. The obvious scenario is an emergency situation. Somebody's very ill, has a terrible side effect, and we need to know whether they're on the drug in order to treat them effectively. The other reason that we might unblind somebody in Apollo or in a trial like this is because the drug that is being tested, olaparib, is a is a drug that is used in the treatment of BRCA-related pancreatic cancer, right, as standard of care in people with incurable disease. So the time that somebody might be unblinded is if they have finished the trial, their disease has unfortunately recurred, and their doctor wants to use that drug. They need to know whether the person had exposure to that drug before or not. So that's actually an amendment going through right now to allow for that scenario. Other than that, in order to try to avoid bias, we are not unblinding people unless there's a clinical reason to do that. That is different trial to trial to trial. Each study with a blinded or hidden drug, whether if you don't know if you're getting placebo or the drug, has its own rules about when they cannot unblind, and usually the reason not to unblind is to protect the primary endpoint and to prevent bias from the physicians. It's not about you as much as it is about us being fair and not incorrectly making assumptions about people who didn't get the drug. So the short answer is not unless you need it. That's the very short answer to the very long answer that I gave you. So that's the reality of that one.
All right. Well, thank you. I hope I never need to.
I know that's exactly right. I hope that you never, ever need to know.
Thank you, Betty. That's actually one of the questions we didn't get to, so I'm glad she asked it because we got her in. We actually have one more caller, if you don't mind.
Okay.
I believe we have Fred jumping in. Is that correct? Fred, are you there? Fred Press, there you are. And I think you need to unmute yourself.
Okay.
There you go.
Yeah,
I can hear you.
Hi, Dr. Kim.
Hi, Fred.
I have a question. If I'm getting treated at a research university where everyone who has pancreatic cancer is getting the same standard of care, and I qualify for a trial and I get the drug, why do you then need a placebo? You have lots of people who are just getting the standard in the main part of the hospital getting treatment. Why do you need to have a blind trial?
Yeah, it's excellent question. And it's more nuanced. I mean, it's more nuanced than the answer I'm going to give you. But basically, when you say, okay, we have a bunch of people getting the standard of care, and we want to do a trial where we give everybody the same standard of care plus drug X, why do we need to randomize when we just have that data? You're talking about basically what's called historical control data. Like you have data of people who have gotten that drug and you kind of know the outcomes of that drug, I think is what you're asking about. And sometimes trials are done that way. So not all trials are randomized. There are what's called single arm phase 2 studies and single arm phase 1 studies where that's exactly how it's done. And we say, listen, we have enough data in the universe, historical control data, that we know that people who get this combination live X amount of years or X amount of months. And we're going to test that. We're going to say, okay, if this adding drug X makes no difference, then we expect it to be the same. We expect the outcome to be the same. And if drug X makes a difference, we expect a year on top of that, for example. So there are trials that do that. In phase 3 trials, studies that go to the FDA for drug approval, they usually often will require a randomized design, standard of care versus standard of drug X. And the rationale for that is that, number one, the populations that you're using in your historical data might not entirely reflect the population that you're treating now. Maybe the population is different. Maybe the time was different. Maybe those people are from 5 years ago or 10 years ago when other supportive measures were different and their outcomes were therefore different. And so they really, to make a good statistical and sound decision, you need to compare people in exactly the same time and space who are getting these two different treatments together. So for example, if you look at people 5 years ago when they didn't get Creon, for example, let's say, which really helps outcomes and helps people do better, then it's going to look like those people don't do as well when in fact they would do better today. So that's the reason for randomized studies. And not all randomized studies are blinded either. That's another important point to make. It's sometimes you know exactly what you're getting, because there's an extra infusion or, like it's not always placebo control. Sometimes those randomized studies do allow you to know exactly what you're getting, even though they are comparing two sides.
And Dr. Trevino, you kind of alluded to that a little bit when we were talking earlier, right? That not everybody is on a placebo, but it's about the the standards of care that they're getting. That's the focus. Am I correct? That's really what we're going to focus on, making sure that the way they're being cared for during the trial
Yes.
is for the better outcome for the patient.
Yeah,
Correct.
exactly. So that you're trying to give people, and Dr. Trevino talked about this too, that you are giving people the best that you have, and then you are trying to, on top of that, make it better. So you are not going to, there are trials where people get a total placebo. There are, where they get nothing. For somebody with an incurable disease that needs treatment, that would not be ethical to do that. And so there are no trials in our space, really, except for one. I can think of one in the last decade, but there are a few trials in our space where if there's a standard of care available, people are going to get that. They're going to get that. They're not going to be, stripped of what would be the standard. That would be not ethical. And so people are getting at least the standard and the best we have, as Dr. Trevino said. And then we're trying to improve upon that in a lot of cases. And again, lots of nuance, not all trial designs the same. Not all the rules are very, talk to your doctor about specifics. But in general, that's how it goes.
Before we go, Dr. Trevino, would you like to add anything to that?
Yeah, I think Dr. Binder hit all the main points that we want to do. And so one of the things I think that resonated, which just really hit me when you guys were having this discussion was, the people of 20, 30 years ago aren't the people of today. I mean, we change, we evolve. I mean, I know there's a lot of questions for people like, how's that possible? But we really do. Our environment changes, what we expose ourselves to and changes, and our generations as they go along change. And so I tell people that the reason we do this now is because for the longest time, I think that we maybe weren't doing this in the right way. We weren't really appreciating how we could all be a little bit different. And I think the idea of, what the previous person mentioned about, why am I just going to get the standard? Because maybe the standard that they gave 20, 30 years ago might make an impact today. We know so much more about who we are biologically that might help us with drugs that were 30 years ago thrown away, right? And so it's so important. I think that our differences are so important now, and we need to appreciate them. And so as we participate in this, there's so much to learn, and so this is an incredibly important venture.
Thank you so much to both of you. I'm sure we can continue for another hour and talk about more stuff, but I appreciate your time. Thank you for joining us tonight. For everybody out there watching, I hope you got some answers. I hope things were pretty clear for y'all. If not, please contact us with information. Just final thoughts for the night. Pancreatic cancer is a challenging diagnosis with some treatments available now and hopefully more on the horizon as we study new therapies in clinical trials. For more information, visit LetsWin at letswinpc.org. Remember, that's .org. Thank you again to our physician speakers and to our audience for joining us today. We hope you find this information useful for you or a loved one who may be on this journey. Reminder that any links that were shown in the webinar will be included along with the link to the recording that each of our registered guests will receive. And remember that this webinar can also be accessed on LetsWin's YouTube channel. So make sure you go to YouTube channel, subscribe, hit the notification bell so you get a notice every time there's a new show, and make sure you comment there and follow us. For now, my name is Daniel G Garza, and it's been a pleasure and an honor to moderate the session today. I will see you next time. Thank you. I apologize. I was supposed to go to Cindy now. Sorry about that.
Can you see me?
We can see you and we can hear you.
Oh, sorry. Sorry about that. Thank you, Daniel. What a wonderful panel you led this evening. It was so interesting. Even I learned a ton. Dr. Reiss, Dr. Trevino, you really are incredible, and we are so grateful for the work that you do every day. and for you taking the time this evening to share your expertise with this audience. So please remember to come to LetsWin. Our new site will be up, and you can learn each week about the progress. There are plenty of tools to help patients and families navigate, and we look forward to seeing you on our next webinar. Have a good evening, stay safe, and thank you all.
And on behalf of the National Alliance for Hispanic Health and the Nuestras Voces Network, I want to thank everyone for participating in the webinar, and to Dr. Trevino and Dr. Reiss. Thank you again. And I feel like we probably need to have another webinar to continue this conversation. So stay tuned and let us know if we can answer any questions. Thank you, everyone.